All right.
Yes.
And action. Good afternoon, everyone. We're so happy to have you with us here at the Save World Make Art Emporium. I'm here today in the fabulous recording studios of Save World Make Art in Lake Orion. We have our artist extraordinaire on location, out there roving and doing what artists do on location. Eugene Clark, Professor Eugene. I've heard that there's rumors of cookies.
Yes, we do have cookies. Cookies are here, and the cookies have been found. Now I'm just looking for people that are making art to helping to save the world. So that's what I'm. I see a couple over there, a couple over there. So this is really good.
Are those bite-sized cookies? Because
they are. They're just like, you just put the whole thing in your mouth. Wow.
Wow.
Oh, God. Chocolate milk. I washed it down. Cookies and milk. Artist's favorite.
You didn't say chocolate milk before, and now this just changes the whole lineup of the show, Eugene.
How do artists sustain themselves?
Chocolate chip cookies, bite size, and
chocolate milk.
Of course. Well, all right. You're all set. I'm hungry as hell, but that's okay. We're not concerned about me. You're on the road. You're out there hunting down artists, who are saving the world. All right. Now, what's our theme again for today? What are we doing?
Well, we're going to pick up where we left off from our last episode, which, by the way, our last episode was our 10th episode. Did you know that? I know. So here we are celebrating our 11th episode, and we're going to continue talking about art heroes.
Okay. So let's just get right into it. I'm going to share my screen so that we can see your guy. Tell us about your guy, Eugene, while I get into the share portion.
Yes, his name is Lucian Freud, and he is of German descent. He did, as I understand, most of his studying for art was in the city of London. One of the schools was called the Slade School of Art, but there were numerous schools listed. I do not have them all memorized, but I do know that London was a big part of his upbringing when it came to what he learned for making art. This piece that we're looking at is a little bit on the early side. So he's an American artist. He passed away, I think, in 2011, if I'm not mistaken. Therefore, I would say he was probably in his late 70s, early 80s. So he produced art from, 2011 back to, thinking of the 50s was when he was coming onto the scene. So this piece is probably done in the 60s, maybe early 70s. And it is a self-portrait. So he's known, his legacy, as I have read on the internet, is he is one of the foremost portraitists of the 20th century. If we're looking at portraitists within the canon of art, he is up there as one of the foremost. He did paint a portrait of the Queen, and so that is a very esteemed and prestigious credit to his resume. We're talking about Queen Elizabeth in England there, but this piece right here, what I love about it—
Not the rock band.
Right. He did not paint any portraits for the rock band Queen, although I'm sure if they asked, he would have said yes. This beautiful piece really represents two things that I love about Lucian Freud's art. The first one is that when you look at a plant and you think about painting a plant, and I've made several attempts. Believe me, I haven't spent a ton of time doing it, but I do know that it's very difficult. because you get lost in the petals or the leaves or just the various components. And it's very easy to sort of lose interest fast and start making things up. And if once you do that, all bets are off and your piece is really not going to have very much integrity. You can tell that Lucian Freud did not do that in this piece. And that I can tell that he was very meticulous in trying to grasp and obtain each and every component that he was looking at. And it's all displayed there in its fullness. And then on top of it, the fact that he was this portrait artist, there is a portrait of him, a self-portrait, hidden in the upper left, in between the different leaves of the plant. You can see he is there. It's his head and his shoulders, and then his hand is going up against his ear. He's listening. And so I love this for two reasons: the hidden portrait and the figure development, but also I do know how difficult plants are. And I tell my students that if you don't have a live model available, but you do have plants within your reach, that is a great alternative. And it teaches you just as much, if not more, than drawing or painting from a live model. So I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, really, so much is expressed here in such a limited palette too. You know, he's got basically raw umber, burnt umber, maybe some cadmium red, and then like viridian and like.
Yeah. So, you know, in our last episode, I talked about Paul Cadmus. And when you look at Paul Cadmus's work, he really does push the upper echelon of color when it comes to integrating color into his larger than life inventive figures. Whereas Lucian Freud, on the other hand, does not do that. So his limited palette is very grayed down when it comes to his work. In fact, we can look at the portrait painting of his that you have. And that is a great example, not only of his portraiture, but of the lack of color. So I would call this a very limited palette, muted grade colors. He's not trying to create something that has an oversaturation of color. He's more concerned with the values. And then he's also concerned with the structure in which we perceive as an artist. When we perceive any shape or form, we're looking at what we call plane breakdown. And this is a great way for young artists to see plane breakdown, because he has so many planes represented in the variety of value that he implements, not into just the face, but the shadow on the neck, into the shoulders, clavicles, and so on and so forth. So it really is a very dramatic portrait that he painted of himself later on in his life. Although this particular piece, I remember as an art student in the 80s seeing this, and I bought a book that this was on the cover, which I still have. And this was sort of my gateway into Lucian Freud, seeing this painting. So I was riveted, and I really hadn't seen anything quite like it. You know, we talked a little bit about Rembrandt, you and I, and how Rembrandt later in his life sort of, it felt like he was just throwing the paint on the canvas. It was like these carefree strokes. Well, I feel like Lucian Freud's work here in this painting represents that.
Yeah, and you know, it still vibrates. I mean, even though I agree, like he's working on value studies, and but it's really subtle color that's still vibrating out of there. You know, there's still blues and browns in there that are making each other, like his ears really pop out of on both sides out of the muted cooler background. So
yeah, well,
really
it is a great
eyes.
way. I know that when you're talking about certain artists that you enjoy looking at their work, you and I have had discussions about some of these artists having limited color palettes. And I think that what young artists can learn from this is that it's not how many colors you have, but it's your understanding of value and your understanding of color and how to use both together. Color's one thing, value's another. You got to bring them together.
Yeah. These colors have personality for him. They're people, you know.
Oh
like,
my gosh.
He knows how to talk with those, to those, and with those colors, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. You want the next one?
Yeah, let's look at the next one because I have a background in printmaking. So I spent a good 5 years in the printmaking lab at the College for Creative Studies. I learned how to do the process we're looking here, which is called etching. And this is where you scratch with a sharp tool that comes to a fine point. You scratch into a piece of metal. It's a flat piece of metal, it's a plate, and it's made out of zinc. And so you're going to scratch into that. And there's a couple different methods. So one is called aquatint, and there's another method called dry point. Either way, both of them require scratching into this plate. So all the lines that you see that are representing the value in this piece are not drawn with a pencil, but actually scratched into a plate. And then what you're going to do is, once you've done all that, you put the plate into an acid bath. You allow the acid to sort of eat into the scratches to make them as deep as you want. The longer you leave it in, the deeper they get. And then you're going to rub ink into those lines. And so the deeper the lines are, the more ink is going to go. Therefore, it will appear darker when you print it. But the nice thing is this looks like an original drawing, but you can make a print of it, and you can do, anywhere from one print up to, several hundred prints, and they all look just like this. So it's a great way for artists, especially back in the days of Rembrandt. He was a printmaker as well. If you want to be able to sell work at a lower rate where people can afford it, they have a piece that they value, but you're able to make copies of it. It just gives you a better way to make it as an artist.
Yeah. And that process of soaking the plate and letting the acid, I took one course in it one semester at RISD, and it was really satisfying to, just this whole, there's a lot of toxic stuff going on. Thank God they have fans going.
Yeah.
But, the whole process of scratching it into, you got to treat the plate first, right? With a chemical. It's like this, it was this red stuff. And then you soak the plate after you've drawn into it, and it eats the deeper lines, and right. But then the whole thing of applying the ink, and it's like getting bite-sized chocolate chip cookies out of the oven, where you apply the ink, and then you pull you put down your expensive paper, this really nice print paper. And when you pull that print up, it's just like cookies coming out of the oven. It's so cool to see it, and
it really is. And when you go into an art museum and you see the word etching or lithography or lithograph, there really is no explanation. And even if there is, unless you watch someone do it, it's really hard to, it took me forever until I started doing printmaking. I didn't really understand the process. So I didn't have the connection. How come that isn't an original? It looks like an original drawing. How can you tell me that's a print? So it really is mind-boggling to see this process that's been around way before photography. It's been around for hundreds of years. And what I love about this is that it looks like his drawings. So you can look up charcoal and pencil drawings that he does. They look like this. He really works in the same way that he paints. He's looking for plane breakdowns. You can see that all of those values represented all over the forehead and in the nose, in the cheeks, and the, under the neck and the chin, all represent values that are depicted within the infrastructure of his face, as well as the anatomy. And he's really good at capturing that stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. What's that etching process with the stone? Where you
So
etching?
that's lithography. So
Okay.
that's really what I specialize more in
Oh, I
than
wanted to
etching.
do that. I never did that.
Yeah.
That looks really fun to me.
Yeah, lithography ended up being probably my personal favorite, and that's what I spent more time doing than any other type of printing.
So are you still scratching into the stone with a metal stylus?
No, you're actually drawing with a grease pencil,
Right?
and you have to treat the stone, the surface, with different grades of uh, kind of like instead of a sandpaper, it's grit. You pour this grit, and you actually literally grind the surface of the stone down so that now it will accept this grease pencil. And then the chemicals that you use are able to remove the grease pencil and make it sensitive to receiving ink. So when you roll a roller over the surface of the stone, if it's wet, only the areas where the grease pencil was will actually accept the ink, and everything else will repel the ink.
Huh.
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah, that makes me want to go back to school or find some place where there's a press and I can go do that. I'm sure that there is. There probably is some
Oh
place
yeah.
where I could rent, space and
And the cool thing about those stones, they were about 6 inches thick or more, and you could reuse that stone probably for literally hundreds of different lithographs, because when you're done with one, you just grind down the surface and then you do your next layer.
Okay. All right, now I gotta go draw. But before I do, all right, let me move on to, I'm gonna move on to my guys. Thank you
Okay.
for sharing Lucian with us because
Yeah.
this guy, he also got really, I think he was like, maybe somebody promoted him in the late 80s. I think I saw him on like 60 Minutes or not six, maybe it was like Good Morning, Sunday Mornings with Charles Kuralt or something like that.
Yeah.
And he popped. Like he'd been known and then he got really big during the 80s and 90s. So
It's true. That was the time I remember right around my time in undergrad, or just after that. I might have been in grad school. You're correct. It was like late 80s, early 90s. Suddenly it was like he was everywhere. And there was a big show in New York City. So I took a trip out there to see the exhibition. And, that kind of solidified all of a sudden him here in America,
yeah,
that he was a force to be reckoned with.
yeah. All righty. Thank you. Two guys, I'm going to show two guys today. I relate them together because I saw them together. I had the opportunity to visit Austria as a younger man and was introduced to, I think I'd seen him, certainly I'd seen him before in art school, but the two guys are, the older guy was Gustav Klimt and his younger, I guess he became kind of like an apprentice, but they were associated with each other and they did both happen to die in the same year. I think from the same first pandemic of the 19th or the pandemic of the 19th century, the Spanish flu that came in after World War I, certainly killed. Egon Schiele is the other artist. And Gustav Klimt died, like I said, the same year. They say that he died from a stroke and pneumonia, but I wouldn't be surprised if maybe they just didn't get that he died from the same pandemic. So after that happy news, one of the things too that really hit me about Egon Schiele was, and Eugene and I have been going back and forth about how you actually pronounce his name. How do you pronounce it?
I used to just say Schiele.
Schiele. Yeah.
Schiele, the Americanized version of Schule.
Yeah, so I think that you can see my little cursor down there. That's actually that may be his signature, a little S. So
Oh my God.
he was definitely influenced by, I believe, cubism. I think that he also was trying to find planes and definitely an artist that was interested in the contours of things, seeing where the edges were, and fascinated by the figure. And also, like in the same way as Modigliani, like elongating the figure, stretching it out, messing around with it. And I think that he was really, I think Billy Idol got a good look at some of his, like this portrait for his hair. I think punk was influenced by a lot of things, and I think that in the 80s, definitely punk was influenced by this guy, even if they didn't know it, because he was pushing the edges of things back in the turn of the century, of the 18th to 19th century.
So
Influence.
this piece right here, it really strikes my fancy because an artist that comes after these guys, Leon Golub, I spent a lot of time working on writing papers about his work. He did some paintings of larger than life figures that really resemble these, and they were painting. It was a series of mercenaries, and I want to just reference that because later on I'll throw him into the mix on another episode. So it's really interesting to see these works that I know came before, but just the style of the way that he deals with the materials, and then I love that, like, what's being played up in here is the drapery. You know, the figures are the central focus, but the drapery is what he's really determined to represent.
Yeah. And I'm also seeing the influence of Japanese prints. It was around the 1870s that Japanese art started to pop into Europe, and still these guys were influenced by it. You're definitely going to see that with Klimt's work in a second. But yeah, definitely the drapery. And these guys were still influenced by the Academy tradition, and just studying the way clothing fell on the figure was a big deal in the Academy tradition. But they were pushing it. They were there, and I think they were also influenced by Cubism. Maybe in a way they were also influencing Cubism. Eventually, and also Klimt was very much a part of the Art Nouveau. Not Art Nouveau. What's the one? Is that it? Is it
Yeah,
Art
Art
Nouveau?
Nouveau.
Yeah, with like Mucha and those guys. So, but this guy, okay, so uh, Egon Schiele did not make the kind of money and have the kind of success that Klimt did. At the same time, I think we were talking about this yesterday. I think he was really expressing an inner world in a way that Klimt was not. Even though Klimt's
Okay.
work is beautiful, but there is something about the angst and like even the pain of
Yeah.
a lot of the figures that he shows that don't show up as clearly. It's not that Klimt wasn't expressing all sorts of depth with his surface treatment, but and it's not that being successful doesn't mean that you can't do that, but there was definitely something going on for him that he died a really young man too. He was only 28. um, Klimt was older. He was in his late 50s, I believe. So there is something about his experimentation, I think, that went into a more of like an internal depth than Klimt's did. So I'll
Yeah.
show you that. What do you think?
Oh yeah. You know, I think about another artist that was around this same time period, and that is Van Gogh, who decided to take peasants and elevate them in a painting. And he did a series of potato eaters, black and white, riveting because they weren't beautiful. And it really showed the somber element that these humans were experiencing in just their way of life. And I think that, reflecting on that work and those paintings, and then seeing this happening in conjunction, same element of time, it helps you to understand, how the World War I and World War II era and the strife that people were experiencing in places like Austria and Germany and other places nearby was real. And it's depicted very well, I think, in the wonderful characteristics of how Egon Schiele felt and conveyed, and the mood and also, I like to use the word psychology
Yeah.
of his view.
Also, Austria was a crazy place during that time. Everybody thinks the 60s with drugs and, rock and roll and was the time when the Western world really went off the edge a little bit. Yeah, just prior to World War I, and actually just prior to World War II, Germany, Austria, they were doing opium, being wild. A lot of his work is erotica. The guy was a little bit unhinged. And it doesn't mean that you have to be unhinged or to get to the depth of expression. It also doesn't mean, like I said before, that if you make money, that you can't get to the depth of expression.
Yeah.
But the fact that these two guys were related, they were friends, they were influenced each other. The last thing I want to say about too is like mentioning Van Gogh. This is Europe just after the war, or just prior to the war, World War I. There's no internet. There's no tremendous, fantastic printing process so that these guys could see in a magazine each other's work. Certainly, there was no online. So I imagine that they did get to see each other and that they're each other's work somehow. They heard about each other. But it's also interesting to me that maybe they didn't, and that still there was this kind of concurrent expression without them even seeing each other's work. It's a possibility, which kind of
Yeah.
points to, like, interesting.
Yeah.
I'm not going to make any conclusions, but interesting.
Yeah, it's hard for us to understand how the things that we've come accustomed to, suddenly to think of those things not being part of these artists' lives, but yet the connection that they were still able to keep with one another, and that connection shows through in their work.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to move on to Klimt. Now, the first one is not indicative of what I think of Klimt. This is a landscape, but it does show the kind of input of the Japanese prints of like Hokusai and Hiroshige, these tremendously bright colors, the contours. Okay, now, so when I see this, and like, if you get into the details of the flowers, each one of these flowers is alive with the way he treats it. It's a really interesting depth, even though he's treating every single inch of that thing as if he wants the eye to follow the whole thing. He's not saying, okay, don't look over here, but look over there. He's, it's like he's buffed up the whole thing, so he's playing with depth there, even though he's polishing up the whole piece.
Yeah.
I'm going to jump over to the next piece. I think this is the one. We all know this one.
Yes.
Or most people know this one. This is what he's renowned for. Eventually it was, they called it the gold period. He would apply gold leaf and then work back into it. So he'd do the painting, apply the gold leaf, and then work back into it. I mean, there's all kinds of stuff going on in here, looking at the background, and it looks like he's thrown paint on there in a Jackson Pollock kind of way, before anybody would have done that. So pretty fascinating to me.
Yeah.
Against the elongation of the figure, and then the really detailed figure rendering, like in the face and the hands. This is a master of the figure painting who has said, screw that, I'm going to start goofing around and doing whatever I feel like in terms of elongating and applying pattern. So yeah, that's what I have to say about that. What do you think?
Yeah, well, I think what we recognize in this particular work is sort of the beginning of what led to maybe art that started happening in the 50s and 60s, which was not only abstraction, but also a removal of the figure. And when I say that, the reason why I say that is because, artists like Klimt at this time, when you look at the way that he's applying color And even when you look at Lucian Freud, how many plane studies, here it's very flat and it's very, but yet there's still depth to it. He was a master at being able to take very limited amount of color and present depth. If there wasn't depth, we wouldn't be drawn to this. So how does he do that? Like, that's really mesmerizing to me, because, we're taught, I was taught from that Renaissance Caravaggio, light and shadow, chiaroscuro, and here all of a sudden we're removing all of that. So those shapes that are integrated throughout are also the way that he's depicting the figure too, more as the face is a shape. It does have the features, but it's got a flat color in there. That's amazing to me.
Yeah. Yeah, and he's messing around with us, because he's got these implications of things in the background where I'm so used to wanting to say, okay, that's the background because it is in less vibrancy, less value, or maybe it's darker. But I don't know what that background is, and I don't care.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it really could be any number of things. And then sometimes we read too much into these things. Maybe he just wanted a quiet space.
Yeah, definitely. All right, let me just this one last one here. So here he's just going all out with the there is a figure in there, and then it gets totally chewed up and by the symbolism and the shapes and the patterns. So to me, it's like, what must this have looked like to the mind of somebody in 1910?
Wow.
They must have freaked about this.
Yeah, because, with Photoshop and what we can do today, with, just on the computer, messing around, moving things around, you really have access to be able to, make something that involves a lot of these unusual colors and patterns. And you can do it, and it's not too laborsome. Where at this time, you really didn't even have a lot of, you didn't have color printing yet in magazines and newspapers. So for painting to go this route, you're right. It's probably the way I felt the first time I saw an iPad and someone using Photoshop. Well, like you doing all your digital drawings on your iPad there. The first time I witnessed something like that, I was mesmerized. I can imagine that's how people felt.
Yeah. Now, okay, and I'll finish up with this too. See, at the same time, you have the lower part of the painting that is a pattern study. Where's the foreground? Where's the background? I don't know. It's mesmerizing. It's like a never having done LSD. I imagine that this is what happens to the mind when one does it, or maybe they were doing a lot of opium. It does look like a doorway into his mind got kicked open, and it's just spilling out onto the canvas. But then when I get up to now look at this, simply that right there, that indication of the clavicle by that slightly bluer part right there.
Yeah.
There's a guy that is a master of figure, and he just tosses it in there, and then no big deal. I don't care if it's just a throwaway, just like, oh yeah, I know how to paint the figure. And there.
Well, you have to admire his willingness to push the envelope in this direction. I think it makes his work truly unique. When you think back to an artist way before this, Bruegel, and you think about the ultimate detail that was implemented with multiple figures within a landscape or an environment, and just the almost zaniness of, it's too much, no, it's not enough, no, it's too much. And you feel that way with this, like there's definitely a schizophrenia that you go through as the viewer, because you're like just inundated with so much, but yet it does to some degree make us feel like we want to see more.
Right, right. So he's done this trick with us where we're overwhelmed, and yet we get to go back to the quiet of the figure and think that
Yeah.
that's just quiet too. But anyway, I really
Great.
this is a good one. All right, so we're done. We've talked about our heroes this week. We're going to do more heroes.
Yeah.
I don't know what we'll let you know what we're going to talk about next week. Have you finished your cookies?
I still have a few. I saved a few so that I'll have something to eat after when I'm watching this.
Okay.
When it hits the public.
Yeah. Well, thank you for hanging out with us today, everybody. You've spent another, as they used to say on Car Talk on NPR, they used to say wasted another hour, but this was not a waste.
No.
You just went for a ride on the hero go round, and this was way cool. I mean, just love these artists. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right,
Thank
so
you.
we're going to take ourselves out here. We'll kick it in with the theme song this week, and definitely stick around. We are finishing up our course. This will be the last two sessions of this go around of our course. We're going to run it again next month, so definitely look into the blurb below for the description of the course. And we're doing character and creature creation. So I think that's good, Eugene. I think we can start rolling the theme music.
All right.
Thank you, Eugene.
All
Adios,
right.
everybody. Bye.
This is Eugene signing off from
Yeah.
remote location.
Yeah, and Matt too. Give me one of these. Bam.
Woo! Take care.
Bye.